It's a whole year since Before the Flood first aired. Watch on to find out why I love it so much. Welcome back to Defending Series 9. Today I'm going to be looking back at Before the Flood. Now if you haven't already seen my Under the Lake retrospective, please go and watch that now because I'll probably be referring back to that in this video. But otherwise, without further ado, here's what I think of Part 2, Before the Flood. The opening is fascinating. It's very clever how it subtly reveals how the whole episode is going to pan out. Because if you think about it, the whole two-parter is just one massive bootstrap paradox. And by bringing it up this early on in the episode, yes, it's sort of obvious looking back, and I remember feeling a bit stupid on first watch to not work out that the events before the flood would influence Under the Lake in such a way that it would create this massive loop. But I still think it's absolutely genius, because if you're watching it for the first time, you don't really think much of this pre-title scene. Obviously it's going to have a bigger part to play later in the episode, that's the implication, but I think it's kind of brushed under the carpet enough, particularly as well because it's breaking the fourth wall. I think it's quite easy to ignore that and forget about that as the episode moves into 1980s Scotland. I really do love the rock theme. I didn't like it initially, but I think it's definitely grown on me. I know some people have said, why couldn't we have had that theme for the whole of Series 9? But I disagree with this because I think it wouldn't have had as much of an impact in this episode if the theme had been introduced in The Magician's Apprentice, because then it wouldn't have made sense for the Doctor to play into it here. Because he plays into it, he does the Beethoven's theme motif and then goes into the theme, it just works more. I think as well because it's this breaking the fourth wall scene, you're not quite sure how it fits into the story, who the Doctor is talking to, and I think that kind of allows the Doctor to do this unique thing where he plays into the theme. I mean, it's very, very different, but I think it's acceptable just because this first scene is so unusual for the Doctor to play into the theme and to have this rock theme just for this episode. Yes, they could have carried on using it in later episodes, but again, it wouldn't have had the same impact and it would have taken away the impact from Before the Flood. And also, while I do like it, it would have been a bit heavy to have in later episodes, but particularly something like Heaven Sent, it would have kind of clashed with the tone, I think. So I'm glad it stayed exclusive to this story. On the subject of the titles, I think they're in sync, just about at least. Again, I'm not an expert, I don't know, so correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I think they're in sync. They certainly weren't as bad as previous weeks, such as The Magician's Apprentice, because that was just absolutely awful. But anyway, the Cold War army village is very atmospheric and spooky. You kind of do believe it's this Russian village somewhere. I know it's just a training camp, it's meant to be in 1980s Scotland, but at the same time, because it's abandoned and eerie, you kind of believe that it's actually the place it's meant to be imitating. So I think that works well, and it's a great setting to choose for such a spooky story, and to build up to the Fisher King's reveal, and his final conflict with the Doctor. I thought there was nice character development for Bennett and O'Donnell, and looking back, it's just tragic to see O'Donnell so happy and enthusiastic about being in the TARDIS, and to see him making all these references to past companions, and Harold Saxon and the moon being an egg, and the Minister of War, which we've not actually heard anything about since, but I believe that will probably come into play somewhere in the near future, either in Series 10 or in a future Toby Whithouse episode. But anyway, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent there. It's just so sad to see her so happy and excited when you know that she's going to die very soon afterwards, by the end of the story. And it definitely works really, really well. I actually quite liked Prentice for a bit of comic relief. I didn't feel that he was too ridiculous or too out of place, and it's a nice subtle continuity reference that he's from Tivoli, which is obviously the same planet as Gibbis in the God Complex. Not one of my favourite episodes, but that's for a different video. But yeah, it's a good continuity reference, but it's not in your face. It's subtle, it's just there in the background. Not essential for a casual viewer's understanding of the episode, which is good. I think that's how it should be done. I also like how much effort was put into the backstory for the Fisher King and how he reached Earth. And I've just remembered as well, there's that reference, isn't there, to the Sarah Jane Adventures and Torchwood creature, the Star Poet. The Arcadians or something like that. I'd missed that actually on this rewatch. but I've just remembered that's in there. That's another very nice continuity reference. And overall, these little references kind of build up into this backstory for the Fisher King, which I thought was very well put together. And having these references in there makes it more intriguing for the fans, and we want to listen to what happened and how these other alien species came into play, and then how the Fisher King got into Earth, and clues about what he's going to be doing next. Because obviously he doesn't appear until the end of the episode, really. The last kind of 5-10 minutes. I just love Bennett's line, "First proper alien and he's an idiot." It's brilliant. Just because Bennett is so kind of sarcastic and cynical and serious and uptight. It's just funny coming from him. Because obviously you think you're going to meet a proper alien, you know, some kind of serious, I don't know, intelligent alien, and just faced with Prentice. I think that's absolutely fantastic. One thing I will say is that jumping back into the TARDIS constantly, it does feel a bit unnecessary. But on the other hand, I suppose it's the only way, really, or the only suitable way for the Doctor to connect with Clara and her party, and to communicate with her, and obviously to learn about his ghost back in the base in the future, and for Clara and the Doctor to have this conversation, which is very interesting because it makes Clara seem quite unlikable, really. I didn't like her much in this scene at all, and I think it's the first time, really. We've got hints of it in Series 8, in kind of Kill the Moon. I don't really agree with her speech at the end of that. I think the Doctor was right to leave her to make the decision, but again, that's for another video. And there's hints of it as well, more strongly in The Forest of the Night, because, while I don't like that episode at all, it does kind of develop that relationship a little bit, or at least tries to. But Clara isn't very likeable in that story either, and in particular the way she treats Danny, and ultimately choosing the Doctor over him. So we did have those little glimpses into Clara's obsession, which obviously started in Mummy on the Orient Express at the end of that story. But this is the first time she's appeared really kind of arrogant and reckless and selfish, because she's asking the Doctor to not die, to come back for her, because she's terrified of being left on that base alone, the flooded base, with these ghosts. Another thing about Clara is that it's very interesting to see her as a proper Doctor-like leader. Again, this is the first time we've really seen this. I have said before in my Under the Lake review that this is the first story, this two-parter, to explore Clara's obsession in depth, and the only story really in this series, because we get some more stuff after this, and it's not really until Face the Raven that it's brought up properly again, although it is kind of seeded in there in the episodes in between. But yeah, this is the first time we see Clara acting like the Doctor, and it's quite scary, I think. There are parallels, which I'll go on to later, between the two characters, and it's just really interesting to see her in a different light, in a kind of negative light in this story. I mean, obviously I still like Clara as a companion, because I feel her intentions are always good, and yeah, she's a bit selfish at times in wanting the Doctor to come back, but she's absolutely terrified of being left on the base, and I think that's only a natural reaction, really, and she's not often like that, it's just occasionally. But for the most part, Clara does want to save people, or at least do what's best for the group. For instance, later on when she sends Lun out to go and rescue her mobile phone. That's a very Doctor-like moment. It's like when the Doctor's testing his hypothesis later on with O'Donnell, which actually leads to her death. The thing with the list of names from his ghost in the future, when Clara relays that back to him, he's then kind of thinking in his own head, being manipulative, and he kind of semi-purposely lets O'Donnell wander off and ultimately get killed to test his theory. So that's an interesting parallel between Clara and the Doctor, which really kind of highlights how similar Clara has become to the Doctor. I think the Doctor's ghost saying these names full stop, the list of names and the order they're going to die, is a chilling touch, just because it just kind of makes it feel more real, I think. Even though we know that the Doctor isn't going to end up as a ghost for the rest of the series, but it still makes the threat and the situation feel real, because obviously this list, we've seen the first few people die on that list. It's been tested, it's been proved, and when O'Donnell dies, that's even more evidence to prove the theory, so it definitely makes the drama feel a lot more convincing. I think also making the audience think that the Doctor is going to die and turn into this ghost is also clever, even though, as I've said, we know he won't. We know he'll do something or change something, or the ghost is just a disguise or a hologram like it is, or something like that. We know at the back of our heads instinctively that the Doctor's going to survive, but it still works quite well to think just for a minute he's actually going to die and turn into that ghost. Again, it's a very chilling thought. I liked Prentice's death, and I thought it was very effective how we only saw the Fisher King's shadow, his kind of silhouette. It builds up the tension greatly because he doesn't reveal himself yet. We don't see the whole of him. We just see a little glimpse. Obviously, the whole reveal is being saved for the end of the episode, the climax, but it does help to kind of build things up, knowing that he's killing someone else from the list, in fact. It's more evidence for the list, because Prentice has died now as well, so it kind of works on lots of levels, really. I think one thing that makes the Doctor's ghost more believable, as in he is actually the Doctor, is that he goes and opens the Faraday cage, because it makes you think it is actually him, because A, he's physically opening something. You know, you wouldn't have thought a hologram would do that, although it turns out it does, but we'll look over that. But also, you wouldn't have thought the Doctor would let the aliens out, you know, to come and kill everybody. Obviously, later on, it's just revealed that this is the Doctor playing his part, making sure the hologram lets the ghosts out, so that other events can take place, leading to him surviving at the end. So when you look at it like that, it does make sense. But just in this context, and just this far into the episode, you really do believe that this is not the Doctor, because he just wouldn't do that. He wouldn't let the aliens out to come and get everybody. I mentioned before last week how much I love Cass, and how Cass is written, and how Cass is used in the narrative. And another little touch here that I like is how she lip reads the Doctor's ghost. Because obviously she's not got a sense of hearing, but she has got better sight. She's gifted with being able to read people's words, because she's learnt to not be able to hear them. She's had to learn different ways. I just think that's another nice touch to make Cass seem a stronger character in different ways to other characters. It makes her stand out, it makes her unique, but while still being a strong character. I've said already how it's tragic to see O'Donnell alive and happy and enthusiastic, but also seeing her choosing to not stay in the TARDIS and to come out with the Doctor and Bennett and come and explore and find out more about the Fisher King. Again, that's tragic, and it kind of foreshadows her death. Oh, she's going to go too far. And one thing that I actually noticed here is this going too far theme. Now that might seem a bit familiar to all of you. It did to me when I thought about it. And of course, this is a kind of prototype, if you like, for what's going to happen to Clara. It completely foreshadows Clara going too far in Face the Raven. Yes, okay, O'Donnell isn't actually sacrificing herself for anyone else like Clara does for Rigsy, but it's still fundamentally the same. She's testing how far she can go, you know, getting high on the adrenaline, going out, trying to find this alien, running around, and it leads to her demise. It's fundamentally the same as Clara, and I actually thought that was really clever on rewatch. I don't know if it's intentional, it's probably not, but it's things like this that you notice when you rewatch these episodes, and things like this that I really love to pick up on. O'Donnell's actual death scene is one of the most impactful, but also disturbing we've had in ages. I can't really remember the last time a character died and didn't come back to life. I'm not necessarily criticising Stephen Moffat or the show or any episode in particular, but I'm just saying that it's been quite a while, I think. So it's nice here to see one of the main characters killed off in such an effective way. I suppose she just come back as a ghost, which is coming back to life in a way. But on the other hand, it's good to see her coming back as a ghost straight away, because it kind of cements her death, and any doubt goes out the window. You know, she's definitely died and definitely come back as a ghost now, and the Doctor and Bennett can't go back and can't stop that, because Clara and her party in the future have seen that ghost, and it's now, you know, a fixed point in time or whatever it is. Although, where was the ghost before in Under the Lake? That's one small niggle that I have with this. I don't think it's ever explained why she wasn't there with Prentice and Moran and Pritchard's ghosts in Under the Lake, but it's just a small nitpick. It doesn't really spoil my enjoyment of the story, but I just kind of wish they'd made at least an attempt to resolve that somehow. Just a little line of dialogue saying, oh, she was trapped here, or I don't know, just something like that. I got big Father's Day vibes when I saw the scene where the TARDIS goes back, and you've got those two TARDISes, two sets of Doctor and two sets of Bennett, and it allows us to explore fixed points in time again, which haven't really been touched on for a few years. We kind of got it in The Day of the Doctor, with the fixed point being the Doctor destroying Gallifrey, but then that was changed. It's nice to see a situation here where events are set, and the Doctor and Bennett have gone back, by mistake, I will add, and they can't actually change anything. Despite how much Bennett wants to save O'Donnell, he can't do anything about it, and that's very powerful. And it's very good to have that scene in there, just to kind of emphasise that and to bring it back up, because we've not seen it for quite a while, I think, in the show. I'm now going to talk about the Fisher King himself, who I've touched on a little bit already in this review, but his actual reveal in the church building is just exceptional. The whole kind of combination of this intimidating and horrific, yet fascinatingly detailed piece of costume design, and the voice from the Star Wars guy, I don't know what his name is, and the roar from that other guy, the rock singer person, again I don't know his name, but the combination of those three factors, the three main people, the guy that's actually playing him, the guy that's voicing him, and the guy that's providing the roar, it just makes for an exceptional piece of work, and a fantastic collaboration between departments. This is a Doctor Who monster done well. Really, really well. It's the departments working together at their best, and the overall effect of the Fisher King is just magnificent. A real compliment to the teams involved. But before I go on to his conflict with the Doctor, I'll just briefly touch on the stuff that happens in between. And yes, another compliment for Cass. The scene where she uses her other senses to kind of pick up the vibrations in the floor is just so well done. I mean, honestly, when have we ever seen a scene like this in Doctor Who before? New or classic. I mean, it's just such a great opportunity to do something with this deaf character, and, you know, they definitely took every single opportunity they could. Cass is used so well in this two-parter, to her absolute strengths. You've got scenes with her lip reading, with her kind of in charge as the leader of the group, and telling the Doctor what to do, and using all her different senses to kind of compensate for the fact that she can't hear. And this scene just culminates that so brilliantly. I mean, the dramatic irony of Moran creeping up on her makes it so tense, so chilling. And the audience is just thinking, you know, oh god, please, Cass, just sense him somehow, do something, run off. But when she actually touches the floor and feels those vibrations, you can see the terror in her face and how she runs off. It's so well acted, a real credit to Sophie Stone. Such a brilliant actress, and a brilliant fit for this role of Cass. Absolutely fantastic. So the Doctor's speech to the Fisher King, it's truly epic in my opinion, and it's great for him to finally realise what his part to play is in this grand scheme of the bootstrap paradox, and for him to actually realise that he's part of this bootstrap paradox, and he's kind of made it happen, this loop for himself, and now he knows what he's got to do to fix things and to make things happen as they should. And the soundtrack, I think, really improves towards the end, or at least becomes more obvious, and the familiar themes of A Good Man reoccur and come back up again, and it's just a really epic ending, I think. And the soundtrack makes the climax even more clever and memorable, and it's definitely one of the best scenes in the series for me. This final showdown between the Doctor and the Fisher King, and the bootstrap paradox finally becoming apparent, and everything resolving together. It's just so well played out. I mean, using the missing power cell that we learnt about in Under the Lake, that's another really nice touch, a really clever move. Using that to blow up the bottom of the dam, which causes all the water to flood out and flood this valley in the first place, which is the reason the base comes into being, really. It's just so well thought out, this whole bootstrap paradox, if you really think about it, and how much thought must have gone into it from Terry Whithouse. It's just breathtaking. Really clever. And for the most part, the flooding of the village looks stunning as well. And the revelation that it's the Doctor and not the Fisher King in the chamber in the future, I think that still works, although looking back, yeah, it's kind of obvious. You kind of know it's going to be him. It's a bit like in the climax of Under the Lake, the cliffhanger, when they say, oh, there's another ghost. You know it's going to be the Doctor, but it still works. So I'm now reaching the end of the story. It's great to see the sonic sunglasses being used for proper scientific functions, although pushing the end of it into a computer port seems a little far-fetched. I don't think they'd be very compatible really, but it's just one of those little nitpicks for me. You know, I quite like it how he just shoves it in there and uses it, but I can see why some people might not. It's a little bit ridiculous. But it's just nice to see the sonic sunglasses being used, A, to create the hologram ghosts, and then B, to remove the traces of the symbols from everybody's minds. I think that works particularly well, because the person the function is being performed onto can actually wear the sonic sunglasses. One thing that I did pick up on that I didn't actually pick up on before, on any previous rewatch or initial watch, is how Clara gives Bennett advice on bereavement and moving forward. Because obviously he's just looking there at O'Donnell's ghost and thinking, you know, oh god, what am I going to do next with my life? And obviously Clara's got the experience from Danny's death. And we've seen how that changed her and how she's now developed this obsession, and it's kind of starting to go a little bit too far. But nevertheless, it's nice for her to give him advice, and for the most part I think it's good advice, actually. I also think that Cass and Lunn getting together as a consequence of this advice, because Bennett then says to Lunn, tell Cass that you've always loved her, all that kind of stuff. I think that's absolutely beautiful, how out of death comes new life and a new relationship. I think that works extremely well. And it's a nice metaphor to kind of end the episode on. The final scene, it allows the Doctor to fully explain and answer any questions that the audience still has. But despite this, the episode still ends on a confusing note, although that does suit the story perfectly, I have to say. And bringing up the thing about Beethoven's Fifth, because it links in right back to the start, and you think, oh wow, that is actually very clever, how this is a massive bootstrap paradox. And actually, I've just thought as well, that works on another level, because the audience understanding of the pre-titles is enhanced by the end. That's like another loop in itself, if you get me. Separate from the whole bootstrap paradox of the narrative. That's actually really clever, how the final scene informs your understanding of the first scene, almost encouraging you to go back and re-watch it. And that's a loop like the bootstrap paradox in itself. And another way that Toby Whithouse's script works on a different level. It's such a clever script overall, this two-parter. I think it's definitely his strongest story, by an absolute mile, it really, really is. And although Series 9 is full of great episodes, it does stand out, it is unique, and it does stand up on its own 2 feet. Like I mentioned last week, after such a full-on opener, this isn't a drop in quality. It's of the same standard, some might even say higher standard, than the opener, and it really doesn't disappoint. So I think I'd probably rate this story a 9 out of 10. It's exceptionally clever, works on so many levels, and I think for me in particular, the relatable characters and the chilling atmospheres of the base and the 1980s village just make it so effective. So just before I round up, I'm going to take a quick look at your thoughts on Before the Flood. Now, the first one I'm going to look at today are from Rebel Whovian and the Black Archive, who both thought the episode was a big step down from Under the Lake, Part 1, and also that the Fisher King was underused as a monster. And yes, I can kind of see why people might think the Fisher King was underused. I mean, he didn't have a lot of time on screen. Obviously he had a massive part to play in this story, but we didn't see much of him actually in action. And yeah, that's kind of a shame because he's such an interesting design. But as well as that, I think he played his part in the story. He wasn't overused, at least, you know. And I think really they got it just right. He was in the story for just as long as he needed to be. Although it is a shame that we didn't see him for a little bit longer, or at least earlier in the story. But apart from that, to be honest, all my other comments this week were positive. I mean, Jamie, aka Typical Madness, actually said there was a rare instance of a second part that didn't detract from the first. Charlie says it's a great episode, not quite as good as the first part, but still an interesting story. While Isaac Dakin, like me I think, appreciates how the bootstrap paradox works, and how the events in this story influence Under the Lake, and how it transpires, how it's all linked together and connected in this massive loop. This YouTube comment from Colcrunch is a bit of a combination of the two, really, although I do agree with him about how heartbreaking O'Donnell's death was. It really did kind of allow us to connect and relate to these characters. I think that's what makes them so real and so interesting. And then my final one today is the thesis written by Jack Colgan that I mentioned last week on the two-parter as a whole. I won't read everything out, but he has some brilliant points here. Much of them are the same as my notes, but they're very well explained. And if you have any doubts about the story, just read them because they really do pick up on exactly what is so great about it. So thank you very much for watching another instalment of Defending Series 9. Please comment below your thoughts on Before the Flood, and do let me know if I've changed your opinions, because obviously that is the aim of this series. Next week I'll be looking at The Girl Who Died, so please comment your thoughts below on that story, or tweet them to me at StetsonDoctor on Twitter, and I'll see you then for that. So thank you very much for watching again, and bye for now.